Hey, everybody, and welcome to another Outsourcing Oasis. This week, David is here with us.
Hey.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and we have a special guest this week, and that's Rory. I'm going to hesitate on your last name. Laitila?
Close. Laitila.
Laitila. Cool. Resolve Digital helps build, optimize, and maintain e-commerce, SaaS, and other products built on Ruby on Rails. They can help build new applications from scratch, rescue projects in bad shape, provide ongoing development and maintenance for existing projects, augment your existing team with experienced Rails developers. They also specialize in Solidus and Spree commerce solutions. Go check them out at resolve.digital. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick, let people know who you are? Or maybe we should make David do it. Put him in the
I know Rory as my first client. A long time ago, probably 6-7 years ago, when I was starting Blue Coding, I put out a message on Reddit. It's kind of explaining what I did, and Rory reached out to me, and we've been working together in one way or another ever since. Rory, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, that was it was funny at the time. I was looking for a Java developer, I think. So that was kind of a Reddit success, and I don't remember if we even worked on a Java developer, but in any case, it kind of led to a lot of different projects. And over the years, I've kind of evolved my consultancy. But at this point, what we do now is basically work with CEOs to scale revenue with software. So we're usually building pipelines, marketing automation, custom software, operation and delivery software, kind of anyone who has a product market fit. And then we try and scale them with automation and build out their systems. And it's taken many different forms, law firms, travel industry, education firms, and, different products. So it's kind of a wide range, but basically anybody that's kind of trying to scale their sales team and feels a little stuck, that's kind of been our sweet spot.
Nice.
Very good. Rory, do you do a lot of development yourself?
Yeah, so I have a business degree in entrepreneurship, and
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, never talked about that. Yeah, it's fun. I always wanted to do my own business, and so I didn't really want to go to university, but I was kind of cajoled into it, and I said, okay, well, I'll take this entrepreneurship degree. But all my businesses always revolved around a software project or idea. And I learned early on that it's very difficult to hire developers. And so, my first business project, I don't know, we had like 30 grand of custom software development into it. This is back in 06. And, running out of budget, the outsourced software development. So that was my second outsourced project at that point. And we're running out of cash to do the development. And I'm like, well, I better learn how to do this if I want to keep this business afloat. So, back then I dusted off, the books on web development and just learned how to program in order to, keep working on the product. And over time, I had a job in a data center, and that was like a second college degree because working tech support and kind of up through the ranks, and then account management. I learned everything from infrastructure to sysop, DevOps, database, storage systems, kind of all the back-end networking, domain systems, everything. So that was kind of like a second degree. And when I went to finally leave and start my second business, then it kind of all came together really in handy because though I like to operate at a strategic level on the business side, I can actually get down in the weeds and actually program and build database systems and build web applications. And that's been a really kind of unique angle that's don't really find easy to duplicate with other people. But it's helped a lot. I like software development for my own products, but then when I'm working with clients, I really like to be on the strategy side. So having both of those angles has been something really helpful to me.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I was a freelancer for like 6 or 7 years before I went full time on the podcast network. And that was always tricky for me, was splitting the difference between being on the strategy side and being on the tech side. A lot of times people wanted me to just get in and write code, but weren't really interested in listening to me when it came down to the strategy and things like that. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the strategy impacted technology and vice versa. And I felt like they missed out on a lot of that. So, kudos for figuring out how to bridge that gap, because I found that it was rather difficult to do.
It's very difficult to do if you come in on a software project as a tech lead, and they don't see you as having the status of being able to make those kinds of decisions or having that kind of input. I absolutely agree. So we basically, the big project that we wrote last, it kind of started out like that. And we started writing it in 2015. We launched it in September 2017. So it was 2 years of development. It wasn't until, for 3 years, I was trying to convince the client to, let's work on more of the front end on the sales side, on the business side. And I didn't actually ink that contract until March of 2018. So it took 2.5 to 3 years of working with the client on software development until they kind of saw the other pieces and what I could help them with. And I haven't actually cracked how to get that going from the start, It does kind of work if I run into someone on a networking event and they want to jump into some kind of sales and marketing project. That seems to be a good entry point. But if we start from a software development project, then I do agree. It becomes really hard to move into that strategy level. And it can be really annoying as a software developer to build things that are complete opposite of the strategy that the customer thinks they want, right? Like you see that freight train coming, they're asking you to build something, it's not what they need, it's going to fail, but you have to build it anyways until, they see their own results. And, that's a perennial challenge, particularly at the level in the types of projects I want to get into. So
it's pretty interesting. So you said a little earlier that you had brought in an outsourced team on your first project.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
That sounds like a risk.
Yeah. And I've learned over the years how bad it is. I really advise against people not doing it at all for a new business. My very, very first software business was an e-commerce car audio website. This was back in high school. A friend of mine had started it, and then I kind of took it over. And so the developers that wrote that shopping cart software, and I had another idea in college. This was a book business. Now, every college entrepreneur starts a book business. It's kind of like it's the business that you have to start because you're in college. You think of college problems, and so you think, hey, these textbooks are too expensive. Let me start a book business. Well, I did it before it was, the thing to do. Okay, so I was out in front in failing at this business, and many people have failed after me. Anyway, so the developer that did the shopping cart hired him to build out the engine for this book business, and it was all really good. But the problem was that although I had some prior programming experience and dabbled around in web dev and a little understood how things work in kind of a general sense, my ignorance of the depth of software development kind of caused me to ask for features that I thought were strategically important or they were kind of cool features to me, like certain ways I wanted the business to account for our inventory, things that were cool in the abstract or useful in the abstract. But knowing, doing my own development now, realizing what a waste of time it was. So, we had $30,000 or $45,000, I think, in investment capital from various competitions and people and stuff, and probably wasted $25,000 of that on features that are good if you have like a full team managing a big backlog. But when you only have $30,000 to spend, should have been spent much more wisely and really could have focused the developer on things that would have helped us generate sales rather than things that would have helped manage the business. So basically, I put business management issues, or long-term scaling features in place of features that would help us get revenue in the door. And, I made that mistake due to my lack of knowledge of the software delivery process. And I see other people make that mistake when they don't have a software background and they come up with a software idea and then they hire someone else to build it. And the analogy that I use now the most when I talk to people and they bring me ideas that they don't know how to build themselves is, as I say, look, if you had an idea in the legal space, I have this great idea to run this new law firm. It's kind of a new model. It's kind of like an Uber for lawyers. I don't know how to build it, but I'm just looking for the right attorney that can kind of put this business together for me. It would be ridiculous if you came into the legal field and had that attitude, or you didn't know how a restaurant was run, but you wanted to build a specialty, brand new format, a restaurant, and you're just looking for the right head chef to put it all together for you. And so people come into the software world thinking the same thing. They have this great software idea and they're just looking for the right developer to put it all together for them. And I think that's the biggest mistake with outsourcing. And I have a note here that you can't outsource vision. You cannot outsource vision. And that's kind of a big mistake. The software developer has to have the same vision that you have as the owner of the company.
So that's something interesting. One of the, I keep track of successful versus failed projects at Blue Coding. And so for those of you who don't know, Blue Coding, basically we help companies hire developers in Latin America. And I keep track of, which ones went well and the client is really happy and they want to continue a long-term relationship versus the ones that, maybe they had a shorter relationship and it wasn't what they expected. And so I found that there's a few elements that really influence the outcome. And so one of them is budget, and that one's pretty simple, right? So if you don't have enough budget, there's not enough time for a developer to go over the learning curve of learning your business. And then, you don't have the patience to see the results either. But the other element that we found is generally involved is whether or not they have somebody with a technical ability inside their team, right? Because ultimately what we're handing off is, look, here's a great developer. We vetted him. He knows what he's doing. But if there isn't somebody on the client's team, either they have a CTO or they have somebody internal that they really trust with their budget and their plans, that can communicate with the developer on the same level, then what happens is that exactly what you said, they start asking for features that they don't need. They have no real understanding of how long they're going to take. And they end up spending a lot of time and money on things that don't really move their business forward. And then it's frustrating for everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that, like all of the contracts that I worked on, either I was more or less staff augmentation, right? So I was part of a team of freelancers or, a team of mixed consultants and not consultants, or, I was the sole guy building their MVP. And when I was the sole guy building the MVP, the ones that went well were the ones where they trusted me to be both of those things for them, right? To hold that role internally for them, as far as we trust you with the budget, we trust you with the project, we trust you to get our vision and to get the idea through. And the ones that failed, it was because they were trying to manage that and they had no context whatsoever for what I was trying to do.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I think I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, but some developers can do both. Right? It seems like Rory can do both. I know I can do both. And it seems like you, Charles, can also do both. You can manage the business side of things, understand what needs to be built, communicated, and then also go and build it. But a lot of developers can't, A lot of developers need to just be handed, look, these are the stories that need to be built. And so having that developer that can bridge that gap, that's somebody special on the team. And I think that you need to have that in one way or another. And the way I express it to our clients is if somebody comes to me and says, look, I want to hire 3 Ruby developers because we're building this new app, I'll ask them, okay, so who's handling your project? Who's on your team that knows what they're doing? They don't have anybody. I'll say, look, we have a great agency that can build this for you, but you shouldn't be in charge of managing this project because you're going to have a bad time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is a realm of, like you said, budget is a big thing. If they have a really big budget, then you can essentially stumble your way to success. You build a lot of features you don't need, and you can throw them away, and then you build new ones, and eventually you find a product that works. But you need a lot of money to do that, and most people don't have excess reserves to waste, and so they do need to kind of thread the needle and have a good project. So most people do need that primary person to lead the project. I struggle to think. Also, the other key is if the project is well enough along and you know what you're building, you have a very clear vision of what you're building. So, for example, if you're going to build another e-commerce store, that's really easy to hire out. You can look at other e-commerce stores and you can pretty much spec it out. But if you're going to build a brand new product and you don't even know how you're selling the product yet, like you don't have an existing sales team, they don't know how they're selling it, they don't know what features customers are really gravitating towards, that is then very, very difficult to outsource the development from scratch. If you get the product over the hump of that initial phase with a core team of developers, where then it can be sold and you have that product market fit, then I think you can bring in developers to kind of augment, because every new feature, every new user story added to the backlog is going to fit within the theme already created. And then those developers don't have to think much about the product because they see this whole system and they just got to plug in a feature here or there. And I think that can work at that stage. But where I've seen it, the last big project I saw fail, I think, was $500,000, completely down the drain on not to give out any private information, but it was basically a kind of social network for entrepreneurs and communities. And that
sounds a little bit like it was destined to fail from the start.
Okay, maybe the idea wouldn't work, but I don't think the first version of the product ever worked. And eventually they gave up and just decided to try and build it on WordPress, and I don't think that worked either. But that was after already like $400,000 or $500,000 into the development team, and it's just brutal because there could have been another way to do it, but people get so excited about feature development is really what it is. They kind of get blinded by the sparkle of running a team and building a lot of features. So.
Yeah, talking about feature development, actually I have two subjects that came up from this, but talking about feature development, so I, with this coronavirus deal, we sent everybody home a couple of weeks ago. We do have an office and some people came to it, and so we just said, look, everybody works from home now. And suddenly I found myself with a lot less work. It was weird. But so I said, during this downtime, it makes me question, what I'm spending my time on. Am I having too many in-person meetings now I have so much free time? But I said, I'm going to spend some of this downtime and get back to coding. I hadn't written a line of code past probably a year and a half or two. And so I sat down and I said,
I'm
what?
sad for you.
I know. Well, I started again, so I'm enjoying it.
Okay.
I sat down and I said, look, we've been looking for a contract management software for a bit, and we can't find anything that we like. And all I want to do is to be able to find whatever contract I made with Charles back in 2014 without having to look through my emails. And so I said, I'm going to build that. I'm going to build a really small version, and I'm just going to hand it over to my team in-house, and they're going to use it. And if it works, we'll see if anybody else likes it. And it was a real interesting experiment in figuring out what we needed to build and what we didn't, because I said, this is internal, so it doesn't even need to look pretty. I just need to convince the people filing the contracts to actually, log in and attach them. And it gave me an opportunity to really try what an MVP is. I think lots of time we get bogged down in thinking, our clients aren't going to like this. It's not ready enough. It's not pretty enough, and so on. And yeah, that's a big challenge there.
Yeah, it's my the MVP is my biggest issue. I don't know if it's the level of sense of rejection or not wanting things done poorly, wanting high quality, but I feel that a lot on projects that I've written. I've written 4 products from scratch, large products, probably 1,000 hours into each of them, and Two of them are used internally by us. We use them for our projects for clients, but clients don't see them. One of them is a product release for the client that'll release to the public, and the other is still an ongoing experiment. But yeah, getting to that core product that you can then release to other people. Now we're getting off tangent off the outsourcing, but yeah, it's been tough. I kind of feel that pressure, when is enough, and how do you get other people on it? But also I feel like the quality level for you internally that you need for you guys to use it is an order of magnitude less than the quality level of one other external person to use your software. And then to take it to many other people using your software is another order of magnitude. So, 1x for you to use it, 10x for someone else to use it, 100x of quality for a lot of other people to use it.
Yeah, that's probably right. I was thinking there were two specific things. One was pagination, right? And so I was like, you know what? We don't have this many contracts. I don't need pagination yet. They can use it without. That's not something you could do in real life. Exactly. The other was if I delete a client, what happens to their contracts? And the answer right now is it's orphaned and it's trouble. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go tell the team and tell them, don't delete any clients. But
yeah,
right.
Maybe there's an archive flag on it or something that's real simple to add, right?
Right. Yeah. It's just, the exercise of getting something out the door.
Are you stuck at home climbing the walls when you should be hanging out with the community at the latest conference to get canceled? Are you wondering where to hear your JavaScript heroes like Amy Knight and Douglas Crockford and Chris Heilman? After the cancellations, I decided to put on a JavaScript conference for you, online. I invited my favorite folks from around the web and got them to come speak at an online event just for you. Go to jsremoteconf.com and check out our speakers and schedule. The conference is on May 14th and 15th. The call for proposals is open until March 31st. Come join us at an online conference that we guarantee will keep you safe and keep you informed. jsremoteconf.com.
Another thing that came up, Rory, when you were discussing earlier was, how do you bridge that gap between being just the developer or the lead, the tech lead, and being somebody who has some real input to the business? And I'm bringing this up because I'm thinking about outsourcing. And so when we think about outsourcing, we're generally thinking of, let's bring in a third party. That could be a company, that could be a developer, abroad, or maybe even, just a contractor locally. And let's hand off a part of our work. But in my, the way I've seen it is there tends to always be kind of a differentiation between, look, this is our core team. These are the people we actually trust to make certain decisions. And then you guys are in some way maybe outsiders, and we'll hand off a piece of work to you, and this is what we expect back, but we don't want you to get too involved in our internal decisions. And so that's something that I'm thinking about. And we had a client recently, last year. This is through Resolve Digital, which is our agency, and they said, look, we're going to move away from our custom e-commerce shop, and we're moving to this. I don't want to name it, but it's one of these big company ERP systems, and they have an e-commerce solution. And I thought at the time that was a terrible idea. Their site was really well built. Everything worked. And they said, this is not something that we're doing only because of the e-commerce side of things. We actually want to implement it across all of our shops, and we have brick and mortar, and we have other stuff. And at the time, I told the development team, I said, look, they say 3 months before they switch off. It's probably going to be more like 6 to 9 months. And, here we are 6 to 9 months later. They're still not done. And it's something I could have warned them about, when they started, if I had been part of this deciding conversation, but I wasn't, right? And so the question is, when you outsource, when you have an outsourced team and you have certain people that are kind of out of that decision-making circle, are you losing out on some of that, or should you bring those people closer? What's your take on that, Rory?
I think it's the hardest challenge. I have, one of my biggest losses I have here, or my biggest reasons for losing on an outsourced project would be need for an architect with situational awareness. And so there's this demarcation between what you're calling, core contributors, and then the people outside the core. And another way to make the demarcation is between people that have situational awareness and people that don't. And so someone that has situational awareness is able to create from scratch new solutions that did not exist prior. And someone who doesn't have situational awareness is only able to implement solutions that are known, that they've done before, or follow directions. And the only solution that I've come up with that is that there's three. Well, one, you need someone with situational awareness always. So you always need that core contributor. But then there's three things that I found are really helpful. One is that there are things that I know how to do. I can describe how to do, but maybe I'm just slow at. So front-end web development or web design, it takes me forever to get CSS in a place that I'm happy with. It's just not my strongest skill set. I can do the user experience. I can get the overall design right, but then tweaking it and getting the actual interface design where it needs to be, I'm just slow, and it's tedious, and I get frustrated easily. So that you can outsource because I know what I want built, but I'm just slow at doing it. That seems to work well for me. The other thing that works well are things that I do well, but I just don't have the time on. So I'm really good at modeling, for example, but I can't think about every problem that exists fully. I don't have the time to think about every problem and model it properly. And so if I can split off a section of the software, that I can offload that computation to someone else's brain, and they can think about modeling in that and then bring me back their recommendations, and then I can tweak. That works really well. And then the third is probably, this is where you don't necessarily need situational awareness. You just need kind of off the wall creativity. This is more on the design side, or graphic design, illustrations, but basically, where somebody can input a creative idea, which is something I never would have even thought of. So I see that most often, like if I'm trying to put together some illustration landing page or marketing material, I can describe what it is I'm selling. And then usually I give it to a graphic designer, and they come back with illustrations or copy that I just never would have thought of. It's just a completely different take on the issue. And I find that really effective. So it's three things I know how to do that I'm slow at, things I don't have time for, or things that are just completely coming from another direction that I might be surprised about the output that I get. But all of those are nested within the fact that at least in the case of the examples I'm thinking of, I had situational awareness over the project. Don't know if that quite.
Yeah. The challenge I see is if you have the budget and you have the team, you're in a good place to do that kind of outsourcing, right?
Yeah.
Now the question is, well, what if when you have a non-technical founder and no one else? What about when you just don't have a specific skill set on the team? You don't have anybody that can supervise that. That's me with sales. I've been learning about sales for the past 5 years, but I can't really. Like hiring salespeople for me, that's like a mystery because it's not something I know how to do well enough to supervise and to delegate and to properly account for the results. And so I'm just, essentially blind, and I can kind of guess, if leads are coming in, it's doing well. But oftentimes it's when things aren't going so well where it's difficult for me to figure out whether the person isn't working out, or it's just the general situation.
Well, sales is a really good analogy. Trying to build up a sales team. So my general opinion is that the CEO needs to do sales until he's absolutely bleeding from every eye and every ear, and can't add another minute, can't stand it, is exhausted. So once the CEO is completely saturated with sales, then at that point, they'll identify things that they can start handing off to a sales administrator or a solution architect. So you've run the whole sales pipeline, and let's say you can run 10 sales at a time, doing the whole thing from beginning sale to close, right? Contract, everything, the solution architecting, everything. You can do, your total throughput is 10. Once you're completely bleeding from the ears at 10, you can then see, okay, maybe I can get someone in at the solution architect stage to then, once I get halfway through the sale, they come in and run all the architecture through the close, and then I come in at the end and do the contracting. And then that maybe gets you to a throughput of 20. So now you can run 20 sales with that architect in there helping you out. Then when you're bleeding at that stage, then you can bring someone in and say, okay, now I can bring in a sales administrator, which helps me manage my meetings, make sure people are followed up on, make sure they have the details that they need, make sure that they're doing the coordination with all the other coaches and stakeholders at that company. And then that helps you get to a throughput of, let's say, 30 sales in the pipeline at any one time. And the very last step of that, so you keep building this up with people that are not actually doing sales. The very last step, when you get your full pipeline 40, 50, at that point, when you know exactly how the sales are done, then you can bring in a salesperson because you have all these roles to help them. And now that new salesperson comes in, only has to do the overall contact, lead acquisition, managing the pipeline, keeping them happy, getting them through the thing, because you've developed these other support roles to help them. And then that takes you from 50 leads in a pipeline at any one time to 100 leads in a pipeline, and then you can start adding more salespeople. And when you've got 3 salespeople, you become then the manager of the salespeople, and then hopefully over time, one of those salespeople becomes really effective, and they can work up to become a management level. That's the only way I can see it being done. I've never seen it successful where a business owner goes and just hires somebody to build their business. If it can happen, it's 1 in a million. I find it to be really, really rare. So
it's interesting the way that you put that, because I'm kind of down the road on this a little bit, right? And initially, I was asking people, how do I hire a salesperson? And where I've gotten to at this point was and I wound up moving some people around to do some of this, but I have 2 people right now that are on lead gen, right? So I don't go hunt through LinkedIn anymore because I don't have time.
Exactly.
And, so they find people on LinkedIn, they dig up their email addresses, they reach out, they go through an automated system. We're using Gmailius, great system, and it automatically sends follow-up emails. And then if they email back, then I'm training these people to do the responding to people responding to us, right? That's where I'm at now. And then on the back end, the whole point is to get them on a sales call. I still do the sales calls, but then on the back end, I have my production manager, and she manages getting them into the calendar, on the right podcast episodes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really, where I've kind of come down. And once my schedule's full up with sales calls, then I'm going to be bringing somebody in to shadow me.
Exactly. And from the customer perspective, a customer talking to a CEO of a firm that's trying to sell them, the CEO always gets the time of day. Mm-hmm. Any lead will talk to the CEO. The other CEOs will blow off your account reps, all the time. Mm-hmm. And it might be at 10% as effective. Your first account rep's only going to get 10% of the CEOs on the phone that you would get, or the buyers. Right. Because everybody knows that as you in control of the company, if there's something that can be done, you can make it happen. But an account rep doesn't have that authority to do that. So
interesting. I'm kind of curious with your relationship, Rory, and with David and Blue Coating. What kinds of things have you found? You mentioned already having that stakeholder in your company that's a tech person that can manage that stuff. Are there other things as far as just communication and let me back up for a minute. So, one of my clients, when I was first getting started in freelancing, he hired me to do more work than I could get done. Right. And so I went and I outsourced to somebody in Brazil, and he worked out for a few months. And then, but this guy came back to me and said, I had looked at him, but I didn't hire him because I didn't know how to vet him. And I'm like, that's the point. I did. But the flip side is that, there were some communication barriers and things like that. I've had other folks who hired overseas and then brought it back because, I pushed the communication. And so that's why it worked, because they weren't good at it. So how do you manage those aspects of things, like in the day-to-day work, when you're outsourcing work to somebody who may not even be in the US, to make sure that they know what to do and how it needs to be done and what you're concerned about and things like that so that your project stays on task.
Yeah, that if you're going to outsource, you need to be really good at writing user stories, essentially. And that's just one way of packaging up really good at communication. But writing a good user story of what we're building, why we're building it, who we're building it for, is really critical. So I'll often get features, right? Oh, well, we all know this. You get a problem from the client. I want this button over here. And if you just package that up as a task and put it onto the backlog of put the button over here, you put the button over there, the client, it takes 2 weeks to get the button wired up. The client gets back 2 weeks later. They're like, oh, well, this button isn't doing, what I thought the button would do. Actually, I need the button over here, and you go back and forth, moving stuff around, trying over and over again. Someone who understands both how it's going to be developed, what the developers require to make a good judgment, and what the product's trying to accomplish would have built all of that into the story at the beginning. So they wouldn't have put something on the backlog until it was well understood and vetted. And that's essentially what you're saying you were doing on these projects, right? You're organizing the feature request and probably subconsciously taking the customer's request and rewriting it into a way that, not that the developer would understand better, but that would actually result in a better delivery is really what it is. It's rewriting stories so that they're delivered best.
Right. And I would follow up as well with them and say, is this what you meant? Yeah.
Usually, there's a lot of strategies. Never accepting any requests from the client at face value, unless it's really a trivial thing like a typo or simple configuration change. Always going back to the client and having them show you what the problem is. Walk me through the workflow that you're doing. It's a really good strategy for every feature. The actual communication back and forth. That's the thing. If the feature request is, or the user story is structured properly, then the communication becomes natural, right? So one thing precedes another. If the user story is structured really badly, then the communication effort becomes multiplicative because you're going to have a lot of back and forth and confusion. So it's all about the seed. You get the seed right, and then the communication becomes a lot less of an issue.
So one interesting thing about that, I'm just going to walk over what a project with Rory and I generally looks like. Is Rory has something he needs to build for a client of his, and the project is X months or it's ongoing, and Rory already has an idea of what he's going to build and what technologies he's going to build it in. And he'll reach out to me and say, hey, David, I'm looking for somebody with this skill set. Can you find me somebody? So we'll go out to our network and figure out who the right person is for that. And then we'll say, hey, this is the person we think you should work with. And Rory will have a conversation with them and see if they get along well, essentially. And then start work. And what happens before that is that we've done a process of figuring out, first, does this person have a good track record with us? And that kind of weeds out a lot of people. Do they have the right tech skill set? But then also, do they have the right communication skills? And there is a good amount that we can do of vetting there. We can definitely vet their English level. Is it adequate for the project? If this is somebody who's not living in an English-speaking country. Things like time zone really matter. So, we don't want to hire somebody who's 8 hours difference in terms of time zone, because then that's going to make things difficult. And then there's just the general communication style, availability, and so on. And so that's part of the stuff that's being done before. But then with a client like Rory, things become fairly easy for us after, because all we need to do is say, hey, Rory, this is the person for your project, and he'll take it from there. And that's not the case with every client. A lot of clients require a developer that can play Rory's role in a certain sense.
Yeah. And I found that actually something that you reminded me of is the primary thing that I look for in a developer, whether I'm going to manage them or not, is I want them. So when we're interviewing them, the thing I'm looking for is how much of an interest are they taking in the product? So we'll do an interview and we'll explain the product and we'll ask them some technical questions or whatever. And then they're basically silent. Yep. Sounds good. Whatever you want to build. I don't care. You want me to build, rockets to the moon? Yeah, sure. You get rockets. They don't ask any questions about the product. They don't want to know how it works. They don't want to know where it's going. They don't want to know where it's been. And those kinds of relationships only lend themselves to communicating through direct specification. So you got to very detailedly describe what you want and the order in which it must be delivered and executed. On the contrary, I found very helpful developers who take an interest in the product, want to know where it's been, where it's going, what they're building, why they're building it. Most people aren't going to be, spontaneously interested in your industry, but there's just a certain amount of interest in what their work is that I find then you can write a user story about this is the feature, who it's for, why it's for them, and they can figure out the details. That makes a big, big difference. But both of these personality types that we interview, I find can be useful. But like to David's point, if you don't have, if the customer or you don't have someone on your team that can manage the developer that doesn't ask any questions, then you need to find developers on your team that ask questions about your product. Because maybe they're not a great business person, but they will have just enough to be able to help you out. So
yeah, I think to that point too. I mean, I've hired a whole bunch of people offshore, nearshore in the U.S. And yeah, that's a really good point. Is if you have the people who are willing to ask the questions to make sure that they're getting it right, then what that does for you is it puts you in a position to where you're going to get what you want, on the first go around or, sometimes on the second go around, but they're going to ask good questions and get things clarified. And if you're finding that people aren't doing that, you either need to train them to do that, or I hate to say it, but find somebody else.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I feel bad saying that mostly because I don't want to tell people to let people go. But I mean, you're putting a bunch of money into this and you need to make sure you're getting it right. And so, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm just saying, don't be afraid to make some hard calls to make sure you're getting those kinds of people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's on the opposite direction as a seller of services. So this is how I look at it when I'm trying to sell my services to a customer, which should be how the customer looks at it when they're buying services from me. So I will not do a deal or do a project that I can't at least get a little bit excited about. I can't drag myself uphill for a client. If I don't think about their project in the shower at all, then it's not an option for me to do, right? So it has to be just a little bit of forward-leaning energy into the project. And I feel that for myself. If I don't have that forward-leaning, anytime I've not felt that forward-leaning energy into a project and then I've taken it on, it's either been dreadful to finish for me emotionally, or I don't do the best job. And I think there's a project I handed over to David because I took it. It was a simple thing, just a simple website cut up, PSD to website, small project. I sat down and I'm just like, I just can't do it, cannot deliver. And I asked David if he could take it, if he had a guy that could do it, and refunded the money and then went over there and did it. I just didn't have that forward-leaning energy into it. And so on the inverse, if you're the client buying, that's what you're looking for. Does the they don't have to love your business, but are they sitting forward in their seat, metaphorically? Are they engaged with you? And it's just a 10% difference in that, I think, can make the difference between a successful outsourcing project and not. So,
I'd just like to add to that I agree. You need to find an outsourcing partner, either a company or a person that you're hiring that is interested in your project. But I think that has a lot to do with just the other party's attitude. It's an attitude you can cultivate. You can become interested in people's work, and I know developers that they're great developers, and we've sent them to interviews, and they are never hired. And the reason is that they they're exactly what you said. We'll build you a rocket if you want a rocket. We're not actually interested in what you're doing. But I think it's a question of, just learning to engage and learning to become interested in something and asking questions about it and wanting to know more. And so if you cultivate that attitude, it will take you a long way. And honestly, the way I always put it is I'd much rather hire a half-decent developer that's interested in my project and can communicate about it than a really good developer who just wants to get things done and move on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep. All right. Well, should we... I think that's a good place to wrap up. Should we hit picks?
Sure. Rory, do you have any picks that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there's a few things I've come across, especially because coronavirus, working remotely with people. We've used Skype. A lot of my clients use Skype for a long time. That's just trash software at this point. It's crashes all the time.
Ouch.
So
it's true, but ouch.
Yeah. So I've been trying out something new called Tandem, which is kind of like a remote in-office software series. It's kind of like a mix between Discord and Slacks. Something really more focused about just being audio on all the time. And that's been interesting to try out because my primary business partner and I would often just be on the phone and just pure code. Either we're pair programming on something or programming in the background. We just leave Skype online, but it crashes all the time. So if we tried out Tandem, that's a cool software. On project management, I've started to move everything into Airtable. I like to do very light project management. So just a simple Kanban board, Trello, and then, to have a Google Doc for the user story. But Trello doesn't let you easily, there's some plugins, but they're clunky. Basically have cards in multiple categories on multiple boards simultaneously so that you can kind of manage different stages of the work. So, I might have a Kanban board for planning and a Kanban board for the current sprint and a Kanban board for QA, et cetera. But I want that user story to be in 3 boards at the same time. You can do that with Airtable.
Interesting. I've been having that problem.
Yeah, me too.
So Airtable is basically a glorified database spreadsheet editor, and it has some rudimentary support for relationships. So as a developer, I'm thinking in terms one to many, many to many, many to one, and you can kind of set that up in there. So that's been useful. And then something on the programming side that I really like, it's not for business programming, but it's called gameprogrammingpatterns.com. And it's a book, but it's a programming patterns book, but it's all oriented around game development. And some of the examples in there are the first time that I've seen somebody properly explain certain programming patterns in a way that I can share with other people and is useful and isn't like, dog inherits animal, German Shepherd inherits dog, right? Just all these stupid examples that nobody would use in real life in any real world application. So that's been something cool that I've been able to use to talk about certain patterns and trying to explain to people and why we would use it. So.
Very cool. I'll have to take a look at those. Rory, if somebody wants to reach out to you for a project, how would they do that?
Easiest way is you can email me, Rory, at iteratestudios.com, ITR8studios.com. Or go to iteratestudios.com, and there's contact link in the bottom corner.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, this has been a fun chat.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you all.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.